So in my role as head of construction for the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, my work centered these last years on the construction and renovation of facilities that help men, women and children directly impacted by catastrophe and notably conflicts. Humanitarian aid in war situation led directly to the creation of the ICRC in 1863. This independent and neutral organization is headquartered in Geneva. Its work is based on the Geneva Conventions regulating the conduct of armed conflicts and seeking to limit their effects. The Geneva Conventions specifically aim to protect and assist victims of armed conflicts and have been ratified by all states in the world. Among the 7 principles of the Red Cross, those of impartiality, neutrality, and independence give the ICRC a free and unimpeded access to all affected countries. In 2007, I joined the ICRC precisely because I share these principles. As an architect and building engineer, working for the ICRC has given me the opportunity to have an impact on the built environment where and when others usually cannot. I'm going to tell you why now I arrive at this stage. I studied architecture in an engineering school in France, in Strasbourg, beginning of the 90s. At the same time, war was raging next door in Sarajevo. This urban conflict deeply moved me, and I started to be interested in humanitarian action. As a building environment student, I would have liked to do something, but nobody at the time was really seeing any connection possible. I wanted to work on that subject on my diploma. I was discouraged by my professors, arguing that humanitarian action is basically just about emergency and tents. I graduated, I moved to Paris, started to design and manage the building site of large-scale health infrastructure. I then partnered at a prominent Paris-based international firm that pioneered sustainable architecture in Europe in the 90s. And I manage a huge project, large projects like the National Center for Rugby or offices in Austria and Germany. 2003, I quit. I created my own small structure, looking at having more social impact, focusing on health infrastructure and offices. That's when I was called by a friend who remembered that I was interested by humanitarian action and who was head of mission in Eritrea for a French national governmental organization, non-governmental, organization. She wanted me to come as a consultant to give them a hand on a large-scale project that they had, the construction of an hospital at the border of Eritrea and Ethiopia. And I had the chance at the time to meet the Ministry of Health of Eritrea, who told me a sentence that for me encapsulates very much what I have been doing since then. Samuel, every day we waste on that project, it's 6 women who die because they don't have access to healthcare. That was the sense I was looking to put into my work. Came back to Paris to work in my practice, but I wanted to go back. I didn't have to wait too long. I was called by the same NGO to go back this time in Pakistan after the earthquake of Muzaffarabad. Just some pictures to make you feel a bit what it is to work in this condition. So that's the car that brought me to the place where I had to live and work. This is the meals we sometimes had. And my work was basically to liaise with the population, to rebuild 6 to 10 schools, and to help the NGO in structuring its fundraising campaign. What I saw 10 years after my diploma was very clear to me, and I was convinced that if nobody viewed any possible link between humanitarian action and built environment at the beginning of the 90s, now at that scale, there was a clear connection. I left Pakistan, back to Paris once again, and then I asked me this question, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do for a living. So I'm going to close my practice and I'm going to look for the best option. I could have joined these NGOs of architects that were booming at the time, but I was not really seeing the clear mandate into that. And then I started to look at the different actors, and I found that the ICRC, with its mandate, was the kind of organization I was looking for, in the sense that I was sure that I could facilitate and strengthen their capacity in what was coming, this urbanization of conflicts. My first mission with them, that's the plane who brought me to, you remember, ICRC, it's all about conflicts and situations of violence. So that plane brought me to the war in Darfur, 2007, where I met very quickly my new clients. And after 9 months, I left to go for my second mission in what was not yet South Sudan, to focus more this time on my field of expertise, because what I did in Darfur was all about public health engineering and water and sanitation in emergency. In South Sudan, it was about taking over a building site at a standstill and making it done very quickly. So I finished the site in a record 9 months, and I was then asked to go to Pakistan directly, because Taliban were pushing towards Islamabad. Large movement of population, and we had at that time to erect a field hospital in Peshawar to treat the wounded. So it was mainly, it was a difficult project. 50% was erecting tents, field hospital, like army-like field hospital, and the other 50% was renovating houses that we were spotting into operating theaters double quick to be able to treat the wounded that were coming every night. The last project that I want to show you about my field experience is the hospital of Sanh in Mogadishu, Somalia, that was shelled in 2010. It's one of the only 2 hospitals that serve Mogadishu. So I had to go there to rebuild the operating theater very quickly. The problem was that at that time, it was too dangerous to go in Mogadishu, so I had to work in remote control from Kenya, looking at archives from my colleagues from the past years and satellite pictures to design in only 4 weeks with consultants from Kenya, very low-tech operating theater that was built in a record 6 months, and that definitely improved the standards. I know that this operating theater is now replicated throughout Somalia because it's a very simple and cost-effective model. Based on these different successes, I was called to join the ICRC HQ in Geneva to set up a team of constructors that would have to deal almost exclusively with large-scale infrastructure in complex environments, including notably surgical hospital and physical rehabilitation center. The idea was to enhance ICRC capacity to secure the functioning of buildings critical in the healthcare system, and therefore to strengthen the resilience, dignity, and respect of people in crisis. To do so, I assembled a team of architects and building engineers to manage the projects in the field. These are some of the members of this construction team during our last seminar in 2016, and I tell them hello because I'm sure they will watch this video. Part of my function was to visit them in the field to support them directly. And these are some few pages of my last passport, just to make you appreciate what became a core activity in my life as head of construction, fighting strategy to defeat jet lag. Another part of my role, as I defined it, because we were more or less starting everything from scratch, was to introduce new tools, standards, and project-oriented professional approaches to the ICRC that I based on my previous experience in Europe. What you see here is the main project management framework that we use. So you see that we worked in 19 countries in the last 6 years on 27 projects. The unit supports new humanitarian strategy aimed at providing long-term assistance at the outset of emergency and early recovery phases, it has enhanced ICRC technical and logistical competencies. By establishing the construction unit and developing its tools and standards, I have introduced, I think, a deeper understanding within the ICRC of the need for humanitarian assistance to go beyond traditional shelter, water, sanitation, and hygiene support programs. As a result of our developed tools and standards, architecture and building engineering are now mobilized to create maximum positive impact on victims and their environment. So these are some of the projects that we did, and I will just focus on two ones now. The two first ones that helped me to define the tools and standards that we needed. So you recognize Haiti, 2010. We rebuilt there a physical rehabilitation center in a record time. It was the first public building rebuilt only less than 10 years, 2 years after the earthquake. And it helped me to define the standards in terms of building site management and to work also with local partners. The second one was in South Sudan, in a region so difficult to reach logistically that we have to airdrop food because there are cyclical nutrition problems there, as you can see. We renovated a British hospital that was built at the beginning of the 20th century and built a new operating theater, a bit like Somalia, but with the challenge that absolutely nothing, almost, we were able to get nothing from normal logistical pipelines. A tool, about the tool, I will just show you that one that you can download freely on the internet. That's a book I wrote in 2014 about how to build physical rehabilitation centers. Physical rehabilitation center is the production, physical rehabilitation is the production of prostheses, ortheses, wheelchairs to victims of landmines historically, and the physiotherapy to enable them to work with these devices. So I did a case study on historical project because before I set up the team, ICRC was already building. The first center was done in 1948, actually. And I went through a lot of cases, different centers, to come with rules that would help us to better understand what we had to do. So that's a developed design for a center. That's a conceptual design, sorry, for a center in Yemen that is on standby now. And that's one for 2 centers that we built in Myanmar, and I will show you now. That's actually the 2 last buildings that were handed over under my watch. 2 physical rehabilitation centers in Myanmar, in an earthquake-prone area where we had to introduce low-tech confined masonry for the first time in the country. It's a climate-responsive building. So that's what you see here, the exercise room where people train with their prostheses and orthoses. Corridors outside, high ceiling, cross-ventilation. That's the workshop where we produce the appliances. And something that I like is that there is a basketball in those centers that is open to the neighborhoods, even when the center is closed, to make the young children for the neighborhood play with people with disability to have a better inclusion and stop the stigma of disability in this country. Where are we now? Not too late, apparently. Many in the humanitarian community believe that the nature of crisis is changing. Crises are increasingly occurring in urban settings, have new actors, and are more episodic and protracted. They believe, and I am part of that crew, that the humanitarian system should be remodeled to cope with these changes. While the humanitarian sector is historically feeding more people, saving more lives, and caring for more wounded than ever before, some of its fundamentals look indeed outdated and inadequate to address these new challenges. There is a huge debate ongoing, huge debate, notably fueled by this urbanization and conflict issues. There was not 1 month in the last 2 years when I didn't have a major study hitting my table as head of construction. You see, I like the first one, Time to Let Go. It's a very good one from ODI about remaking humanitarian action in the modern era. When disaster and conflict collide, because of climate change, this is something that happens more and more. Changing humanitarian action, I think I told you that I think, yes, we should. Protracted conflict and, I cannot read, humanitarian action, some recent examples, so lessons learned. The UN about new ways of working, the international non-governmental organization thinking about the future of aid, how to bring private funding into that thing, how to stay alive because we are more and more targets, and war in cities that require a collective shift from traditional humanitarian assistance paradigms in order to review traditional professional boundaries and to establish new modes of governance. I strongly believe the built environment professionals can have a significant input in this remodeling of humanitarian system because of their focus on urban areas and their relation to development and the private sector. With guidance in strategic planning, built environment specialists could contribute to interdisciplinary collaboration, thereby expanding traditional professional boundaries. Unfortunately, that is not the case right now, and only few of us take part to the debate. Construction itself can be an important element in this remodeling, but the humanitarian community has to understand its potential impact in the broad sense. Building can indeed do more than simply providing shelter or healthcare services. They are part of the society and sometimes a good vehicle to foster its economy. My intention for the fellowship year is to explore these potentials. And to do so, I want to look at two things. The first is the strategical consequences of what is called the humanitarian development nexus, which is basically what I had to deal with in my last 10 years, building long-term buildings in emergency and post-emergency contexts. And the second one are the new models of humanitarian aid financing based on what is called blended finance that we initiated last year for the first time with the first humanitarian impact bond based on the construction and operation of physical rehabilitation centers in Africa. I also consider, and I will finish with that an important part of my input here is to strengthen the relationship between theory, practice, learning, and teaching. The Red Cross, UN agencies, Doctors Without Borders, among the main players, are looking for talents, sometimes desperately. I did. Architects and building engineers do not know the reality of this huge sector that some even call an industry. I think, encourage students to broaden their thinking and vision about what they can do in the humanitarian and development field and make them realize what is for me the key message of architecture in this context. It's not about you, it's about them. Thank you.